welcome to the August Q&A. So we've got some great questions this month, obviously all about lighting. So let's dig right in. The first question comes to us from Shannon. What is the best lighting option for on-location outdoor shoots, speed lights versus strobes, and what modifiers? Shannon, the million-dollar question, isn't it? We all want to know what the best option is, and unfortunately there is no best answer for this. It really does depend on your style and on the current situation. And so I can tell you I use both. I've got a bag of speed lights. I've got 5 speed lights in my bag, all sorts of modifiers. We'll talk about those in a second. And then I've got my Profoto B1 and my B2s, depending on the situation. And so let's just dive into this. When we're talking about speed lights serve a great purpose in my bag. I'll never get away from using them. They're light, they're portable, they're easy to use, but the downside to them is just power. Speed light is typically putting out in the range of 50, 55 watts per second, whereas a Profoto B1 is putting out 500 watts per second. So you're talking about a considerable amount of power difference. Now, if I'm at a wedding or an indoor location, am I gonna be running around with a Profoto B1 lighting everybody up? Of course not. That's gonna light up the entire room. That's not what I'm looking for. So you have to understand the situation. And so to your point, unfortunately, I'm gonna tell you, you need to have just this plethora of tools in your bag. It's like asking a carpenter, what's the best kind of screwdriver to have? You go into a carpenter's toolbox, he's got a ton of screwdrivers. You've got to have something like that. And I understand it's expensive, so is being a photographer. This is why we got to charge money and be able to build our gearbox. So I hope that helps. When it comes to modifiers, on my speed lights, I use MagMod. I'm absolutely in love with them for their grids, their gels. And then on my Profoto, my B1 and B2s, the modifier I'm using right now is I either go bare bulb, so to speak, right? So hard edge light, same for my speed lights. I do like a hard edge light, but you've got to figure out, is your look soft and dreamy, or is your look a little more edgy, a little more dramatic, right? So there's yet another, it depends. So for me right now, what I'm using is the Profoto umbrella with the softbox that goes over the top of it, right? And so you're firing into the umbrella and then it's softening that light, right, that way. But if I'm outside on a windy day, I can't necessarily use that, or I have to have an assistant hold it. But it's creating this nice soft light when I'm looking for that soft light, and very, very portable. Next question comes to us from Brittany. How about simple speed light setups? When I was first starting out with flash, all I could afford was speed lights. I think a lot of people would love to see what you could do with 1, 2, or 3 speed lights. Guys, speed lights, rather than turn this Q&A into a true speed light session, speed lights are a great alternative. Again, it just depends on what you're doing. Now, if I'm out on location, very rarely am I gonna set up a 1, 2, or 3 speed light setup. To me, that starts looking like a studio setup. We just recently did something at B&H, it'll be on YouTube, where we showed a 5, 6 speed light setup, just like you would set up in a studio. So main, fill, hair light, backlight, kicker on the backdrop. But what made it all work, right? You're not gonna use that stuff bare bulb. What made it all work and brought it together where we were using Westcott's rapid boxes, right? These things are absolutely incredible. If you've never checked them out, I would highly recommend you check them out. They're completely portable, they collapse, they open up very quickly, and they're meant for your speed lights. So these are modifiers for your speed lights. They've got an octabox, they've got strip boxes. Again, very, very portable, very, very affordable, and just top notch. And so right tool for the right job. So don't be afraid to use your speed lights in those situations. But keep in mind, if you set your speed lights up correctly, which is more than just 4 AA batteries, if you're using just 4 AA batteries, you're gonna have a lot of trouble just recycling. That's the big disadvantage, if you will, with speed lights. Can you get by with it? Of course. But now you need to start adding battery packs to those speed lights. So the cost quickly starts getting up to a point where you go, okay, speed light is all in is $1,000 with the speed light and the battery packs and everything else you have to add to it. Or studio strobe, I mean, you can get, there's all sorts of ones on the market. You don't have to go just Profoto. Profoto happens to be what I use, but you've got everything from Profoto to Paul C. Buff, right? You've got Einstein and all White Lightning and all those other strobes that are actually cheaper in some cases than speed lights. So go out there and start doing your research and seeing what's gonna work for you. Next question comes to us from Rick. Along the same lines of using lighting outdoors, what are some options for overpowering the sun if you only have speed lights? Rick, I would say for the first 4 years of my career, 5 years of my career, I never brought studio strobes outdoors. So Profoto wasn't even in my arsenal. I was overpowering the sun with one speed light, right? It's about distance at that point. So if I go stand off, 20 feet away, 20 yards away, a speed light is not lighting anything, okay? You might as well get a flashlight at that point. So instead, you're gonna have that speed light on full power, and you're gonna have to get within 3, 4, 5 feet of your subject. So the trick there is, if your assistant is standing there holding that speed light 4 feet from your subject against a brick wall, good luck, man. I don't wanna have to re-edit that and get the skew right and the bricks right. That's gonna be a nightmare. What I tend to do for my big dramatic shots, if you look at our website, is I position my assistant in a place that I know I can edit them out quickly. Has to be quickly. I don't wanna have to be rebuilding pathways and trees. Usually my assistant will be holding it so that their arm is in the sky. And then that becomes a really easy edit to remove. But it absolutely can be done with one speed light. Let's say, okay, I don't wanna do it with one. I don't wanna be that close. I don't wanna do all that Photoshop stuff. Okay, we'll start building your speed lights. 1, 2, 3 speed lights. I believe Westcott, again, has something called the triple threat. And this is a hot shoe mount that allows you to put 3 speed lights on one light stand. And that is gonna put out some significant power for you. I would not use that bare bulb. I would use that with some off-camera light modifiers like an Octabox or something like that. So please do keep that in mind. Next question comes to us from Eddie. I've been shooting with speed lights on location, and now I would like to add a strobe into the mix. I want the ability to control the power levels on both strobes and speed lights from the camera position. I currently have a Nikon camera, 4 Nikon flashes, Yongnuo triggers. What options do I have? Eddie, I wish I had a real solid answer for you on this. Now, there are ways that you can control the triggering of that. ProPhoto makes triggers where you can fire your trigger. ProPhoto makes options where you can fire your trigger from camera and fire off your ProPhotos and connect them to speed lights. That's an option. Yongnuo also makes that where you can plug in right to either a hot shoe or a hot sync cord and get those things firing for you. But as far as controlling power levels, you're dealing with all sorts of different manufacturers who are not necessarily sharing their standards on how that's all going. So personally, as of this taping, I'm gonna do more research, but I am unaware of any single unit that allows you to control power across multiple styles of flashes. So unless those two vendors are working together, it escapes me for a minute, but there was a trigger company that was working with Paul C. Buff. So not only would it control your off-camera flash, but it would control and fire the Paul C. Buff units as well, the Einstein units. And so there are manufacturers that are working together, but there's no universal that I'm aware of at this moment where you can go out there and just grab and start plugging in lights and control power. You might be able to fire them, but you're not necessarily going to be able to control power, which for me is a reason why I would stick with one platform. So when I'm looking to mix my Canon speed lights and my ProPhoto, at the end of the day, I've got to manually adjust each one of those units unless I'm using the ProPhoto triggering system, in which case I can control my ProPhotos. And so it just depends on what you're looking to do in that situation. But I'm going to do a little more research so we can get you the right answer. Next question comes to us from Michelle. Along with what Rick said, I need to control the sun during the middle of the dang day when there is no other choice, say a wedding with run and gun setup, speed lights. I am also a solo shooter with just one assistant. It gets tough. Absolutely, Michelle. And so to that point, when we're on a wedding day, I too am a run and gun style shooter. I have an assistant, but we're not running around with all this studio lighting gear. We try our best to use speed lights, but sometimes speed lights are just not going to put out enough power. That's where you need to pull out what I would call your studio strobe, or what I would use is my B1. So the B1 is usually going to be what I use in that situation, but I know it's that situation before I ever step on the scene. So for example, on a wedding day, I'm running gunning, but I see this hilltop, I want to darken the sky, big dramatic sky, or I'm on a beach, right, and I need that sky to come back in. I already know a speed light's not going to work. It's just not capable of putting out enough power. That's where the B1 comes into play. So as soon as I walk up onto the scene, my assistant's already grabbing the B1. So you have to have both in your bag. Can you overpower the sun? I answered this question earlier. You can with a speed light, but it's going to go a little bit like this. Pop. Count to 5, because it's going to take 5 seconds or more for your speed light to recycle. Whereas with your a B1 or a studio strobe on a battery pack, you're looking at 1 second or less recycle time. And so time is money. If I can only take one shot every 5, 6, 7 seconds, I've got bigger problems. And so if you're trying to capture that action, you've got to start considering upgrading. So I hope that makes sense. Next question comes to us from Jill. Light meters. How to use and which are best? How to use. Well, okay. So here's the light meter I have. I've been using this for probably 7, 8 years now. So you don't have to go out and buy the latest and greatest all the time. This is the Seconic L358. And really simply, you're going to measure one of two things. You can go YouTube a million videos on how to use this light meter, but I'm just going to try and give you practical advice on how I use this light meter. So stay with me, okay? What I'm going to typically do, let's use this. So I can control my ISO, I can control my shutter speed, right? We all know that our sync speed on our cameras, most of them are 200 or 250th of a second. So you're going to set up your sync speed, and then you're going to take a reading. Okay, well right here, the reading is at ISO 100. The f-stop would be 1.4. All right, well that's just not, that's way too much light we're letting in, and your lens may not be fast enough. So what I would do here is adjust my shutter, my ISO to ISO 400, and then the light meter is showing me that at 2/50th of a second, I'm at 2.8. And I know you can't see that, but I'll read it to you. I'm at 2.8. So that's the ambient light in the room hitting me, no flash. So now you have a choice to make. If you're going to add flash into the scene, okay, you want to try and match the ambient light, maybe, or you want to overpower that ambient light. And this is where having that light meter is so very, very important. Now, sometimes I'm just running and gunning, getting out there, doing what I got to do, going off my experience. But when I start getting into tricky situations, I'm going to measure ambient light. And if you look at the cover this month, that's a perfect example. We didn't want to necessarily overpower everything and make it look artificial. You ever see those shots where the flash is so noticeable, it's a completely artificial look? There's nothing wrong with it. That, in theory, is what the artist was going for. Sometimes I'm doing that with my own shots. So you have to think like an artist, what are you looking to accomplish in this shot? If you're looking to balance ambient light, well, you can't balance it if you don't really know what the ambient light is. You're just guessing at that point. If you want to overpower it, it's very tough to overpower it without knowing what it is. So this little light meter will allow you to measure both ambient light, and then you can switch modes and measure the flash that's hitting your subject as well. So that is just kind of a down and dirty crash course. This is how we use it. This is in my bag. I use it all the time. Probably one of the most important tools I have in making a great image, especially if you want to control light and not just be reactionary, right? So a lot of times we get back, we look on our computers and we're like, shit, this doesn't look the way I'd hoped it would look. Right, because you just were firing flash in there, right, and shoehorning it in and not really paying attention to what was going on. All right, last question, Sarah. When should I use speed lights versus pro photo B1s versus pro photo B2s? This is probably one of the most common questions I get asked, because everybody who, if you follow us, you see that I'm using speed lights sometimes, B1 sometimes, B2 sometimes, and I think it really becomes overwhelming unless you've got an endless budget trying to figure out what to add to your arsenal next. Now, I will tell you, when I started out, I just had one speed light. Then I had 2, then I had 3, then I had 4, then I added studio strobes. And so I didn't just start up, wake up one day, go out and spend thousands of dollars on equipment. That's not what I'm advocating you do. Instead, what you have to do is add incrementally to your arsenal. Now, that being said, here's how you have to think about this. It's about power. B1s are going to put out 500 watts per second. B2s are going to put out roughly 250 watts per second. They've got multiple heads, so you're splitting some of that power across two heads. But just consider it about 250 watts of power. Your speed lights are typically in the 50 to 65 watts of power range. So just in a nutshell there, that's going to tell you, here's the difference between all of those units. Okay, well then the next thing is, obviously, when am I using each of these? And the short answer is, unfortunately, it just depends on the circumstances. On a bright sunny day, I want as much power as possible. Sunset, hold on, we got cops going by, ambulance going by, it's chaos here. Okay, so on a bright sunny day, we want that B1. I need that 500 watts per second power. I need that recycle time. But if it's a sunset, I can get by with a speed light. I can get by with my B2. And so the difference there, in a nutshell, my personal explanation, if you will, is going to come down to power and then light modifiers. And so you need light modifiers for each of these systems as well. What I love about the Pro Photo system is all the modifiers that work on the B1 also work on the B2. Those will not, unfortunately, work on the speed lights. And so then you have to start going and adding new modification systems for those speed lights as well, unless you're just firing bare bulb, things like that. But the company to look to for that is what I use. I love MagMod. They've got a ton of different light modification systems. So great questions this month, all about lighting. So get out there, practice, experiment, build your portfolio, learn what a light meter is, learn how to use it, and become a better photographer.